All right, so today we're diving into something pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think will resonate with a lot of our listeners. Um, we are going to be looking at the Spanish legal system.
Okay.
More specifically, we're going to be looking at these two concepts of peritaje and tasación.
Sounds good.
And, we're really lucky because our listeners sent us a whole bunch of legal texts, educational materials, all sorts of things to kind of help us figure out what
Great stack of resources.
these terms actually mean in practice. So what we're going to try to do in this deep dive is to, kind of clarify those terms for our listeners, and then maybe even more importantly, explore the role of what's called a perito in Spanish legal proceedings. And that's basically, the expert.
The expert.
Yeah. And so we're going to look at all sorts of areas. We're going to look at, medical, real estate, even IT. So we're going to cover
A very diverse range, yeah.
quite a bit of ground here.
So this is really like a deep dive into how specialized knowledge is used in Spanish courts, right? Like how it affects actual legal cases. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
To get started, I think it's helpful to just lay some groundwork with this first concept, peritaje. And we actually have a really clear definition in the Spanish legal code, Article 335.1 of what they call the LEC. That's short for Ley de Enjuiciamiento Civil, which basically means the law that covers civil lawsuits in Spain.
Gotcha.
So this article basically says that whenever you need specialized knowledge to assess what happened in a case, the parties can bring in an expert. And that knowledge could be like scientific, artistic, technical, even practical know-how. It's pretty broad.
So, okay, I'm starting to get the picture here. So peritaje, at its core, is kind of like an expert report, right? Like some kind of formal document.
Exactly.
Where the expert answers specific questions or maybe gives their professional opinion on something, right?
Yeah.
Like something the judge asks for, or maybe something one of the parties needs clarified.
And the goal is really to make things clear for the people who aren't experts in that specific area, right? Like, for example, the judge.
Yeah, the judge, the jury, whoever's trying to decide the case.
And these reports, they can't be all jargon and technical stuff. They got to be understandable to regular people, too.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of like taking something really complicated and trying to explain it in a way that anyone can understand.
Absolutely. It's like building a bridge between those two worlds, the world of experts and the world of law, which can be pretty complex itself.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like peritaje can be used in all sorts of situations then, right? It's not just one thing.
Right. Like, depending on who's asking for it, it can be judicial or private.
Okay, what's the difference?
So judicial peritaje is the kind that happens within a legal case, right? It's requested either by the court, like the judge, or by the people involved in the lawsuit. Let's say there's a case about some fancy software and nobody really understands how it works. They might bring in an IT expert to do a peritaje to explain everything.
So in that case, the IT expert is like the perito, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. And what about the private kind?
So private peritaje, it's kind of similar, but it happens outside of a courtroom. Like individuals or companies might ask for an expert opinion for their own reasons, not necessarily because they're in a lawsuit.
Gotcha. And that makes me think about something that our sources mentioned, peritaje. While it can be essential to get to the truth in a lot of cases,
right?
Our sources mentioned that there's a real cost factor.
Oh, for sure.
Like it can get pricey.
Right.
And if you're someone who doesn't qualify for free legal aid, it could be a huge barrier.
A real obstacle, yeah. And even if you win your case, and the judge says the other side has to pay your legal costs, it's not always guaranteed that you'll actually get that money back, especially if they're broke. It's a tough situation, and it definitely raises some questions about equal access to justice for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something to think about for sure.
So moving on, let's unpack the other term, taxation. Okay, so the Real Academia Española, which is basically like the official authority on the Spanish language, they define tasación as estimating the value of something, like a good or a service. But the more technical term they use a lot is reporte de valoración, basically a valuation report.
So, okay, if I'm understanding this right, if peritaje is about getting expert opinions and answers, tasación is all about figuring out how much something's worth.
Yeah, it's about putting a price tag on something, and it has to be justified,
So this is where you bring in a Teixidor, right?
Yes.
Like a professional appraiser.
Exactly. Someone who knows the market, who can use the right methods to determine what something should actually cost.
Okay, now here's something that I found really interesting in the materials.
Yeah.
The perspective, like whose perspective we're talking about, really changes things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. If the owner is the one trying to get a taxation, they might be factoring in things like sentimental value, right?
Yeah, like how much something means to them personally.
Right. But when you're doing a taxation for someone else, like for a legal case or for a bank, it has to be based on cold, hard facts.
Objective data, yeah. Like you can't just say, oh, this old chair is worth $1 million because my grandma sat in it.
Exactly. Haha. No, you need comparable sales, market trends, stuff like that.
You need to justify that number.
Yeah.
And the end result of this whole process is usually like a formal certificate.
Yeah, a certificate that states the value. But our sources also say it might include some extra notes. You know, like if there's something about the asset that needs more investigation, or if there are some loose ends that could affect the value later on.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not always just a simple number. There might be some caveats.
Exactly. And the person who does all this, the Teixidor, they need to be on top of their game. They have to know how the market works, what affects prices, all that.
Yeah, they're like market watchers, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so we've got paritae, the expert opinion, and taxation, the valuation, but there's also this thing called a paritation official.
Right, the official expert report.
Yeah, and that's when things get really official, right? Like when the court gets involved.
Yeah, this is when you have experts appointed by the judge directly, or sometimes a party in the case will ask for a specific expert. This usually happens during what they call the prueba, which basically means the evidence phase of a trial.
Gotcha. So this is like next level seriousness.
Exactly. And, you know, I think it's important to highlight some key differences between a tacioff and a paritation.
Mm-hmm.
One big one is that a taxiation often involves physically going and inspecting the thing that's being valued, right? Like you have to see it with your own eyes.
You have to kick the tires, so to speak.
Right. But with a paritation, it might not always be necessary. Like if it's about analyzing documents or something, it might be done remotely.
Okay, so sometimes they don't need to be there in person.
Right. And here's another thing. From what I understand, a taxation on its own, while it gives you a value, might not have the same legal weight as a paritation that happens as part of a lawsuit. It's like a paritation is backed by the court, so it's more official.
Gotcha. So there's a difference in how they're viewed legally.
Exactly.
And here's another thing that I found really interesting. The perito, the expert,
yeah,
they can actually give opinions on things that aren't about money.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, think about expert on rare books. They might be able to tell you if a book is a genuine first edition, you know, but they might not be the best person to tell you how much it's worth on the market.
Right, because knowing the history and the details of a book is different from knowing how much collectors are willing to pay for it.
Exactly. Like, a librarian might be great at figuring out if a book is a first edition based on all the little details, but it's the rare book dealer who really knows the market value.
It's a different kind of expertise.
Absolutely. And that's what's cool about paritaciones. They cover a lot of ground. Like we have medical legal assessments, psychological evaluations, even IT forensics.
Yeah, it's way more than just putting a price tag on something.
Right. Speaking of medical stuff, let's talk about paritacion medico legal.
Okay, so that's like the medical legal expert report.
Right. It falls under this whole area called medico-social disciplines, or sometimes judicial medicine or forensic medicine.
Gotcha. And this is a really big field, right?
Huge. It covers everything from criminalistics, that's where they use medical knowledge to help solve crimes, to forensic thanatology.
Thanatology, that's the study of death.
Right, exactly, yeah. And then there's forensic pathology, which looks at how people died. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
And I bet it gets pretty intense.
Oh, for sure. But there's more. It also includes things like forensic sexology, legal medicine that deals with newborns, forensic psychiatry, which is all about mental health and the law, and forensic toxicology.
Toxicology, so that's like poisons and drugs, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And it even covers stuff like occupational health and insurance, like if someone gets hurt on the job. So yeah, it's a really broad field.
Wow. So it's like if there's any medical aspect to a legal case, they call in the medico forense, right?
Yep. That's the forensic doctor. And they play a really important role. They help the courts, they issue reports, they go to crime scenes, they assess injuries, even write death certificates.
So they're like the go-to medical experts for the legal system.
Pretty much, yeah. And our sources point out that there are certain qualities that make a good forensic doctor.
Okay, like what?
Well, for starters, they need to be really good at explaining complex medical stuff to people who aren't doctors.
Yeah, that makes sense. They need to be good communicators.
Exactly. They also need to be quick on their feet because you never know what kind of questions they'll get in court. And they need to be confident and convincing when they present their findings.
So basically, they need to be experts in medicine and experts in communication.
Exactly. It's a demanding role.
So when we talk about a medical expert report, it's basically a piece of evidence that comes from this independent medical professional.
Right. They're not involved in the case beyond providing their expertise.
Okay. And they look at all the medical stuff, use their knowledge and experience, and then give their conclusions.
Exactly. And the goal is to convince the court, to show them whether the medical claims made by the different sides are actually true or not.
Gotcha. So it's all about getting to the truth. Now, our materials also mention that the laws that cover these medical expert reports, they're different depending on if it's a criminal or civil case.
Yeah, that's right. So for criminal cases, you've got Articles 456 to 485 of the ELI-CRIM. That's the criminal procedure law in Spain.
Okay. And for civil cases?
You look at Articles 610 to 632 of the LEC, the Civil Procedure Law. And then, of course, there are specific rules for labor cases, too, especially when it comes to things like work-related disabilities. It can get pretty specific.
It sounds like it. All right. So another term that came up in our research was daño corporal.
Yes, which means bodily injury. It's a broad term that can include physical harm, but also emotional or psychological harm.
So it's not just about broken bones, it's about any kind of damage to a person's well-being, right?
Exactly. Our sources say that there are a lot of different definitions, but they all basically agree that it's about a change for the worse in a person's health, something that wasn't there before.
Okay, so like a negative alteration of their previous state.
Precisely.
And what's the forensic doctor's role in cases like this?
Well, they do a complete clinical assessment. They look at the injuries, describe them, say how bad they are, how long it'll take to recover, and if there will be any lasting effects, what they call sequelas.
And they also determine if the person can't do certain things anymore because of the injury, right?
Exactly, yeah. Any limitations on their physical or mental abilities.
Okay. Now, this sequelas thing, that sounds pretty important.
Oh, yeah. Sequelas are basically the long-term consequences of an injury, the things that stick around even after you've healed.
So it's like the permanent damage.
Yeah, pretty much. And they can be physical, like a scar or a limp,
Yeah.
but they can also be functional, like if an organ doesn't work as well as it used to. Or they can even be psychological, like memory problems or personality changes.
Wow. So it's not just about what you can see on the outside. It can go much deeper than that.
Exactly. And then you have things like aesthetic sequelas, which affect how someone looks, and moral sequelas, which is about things like pain, suffering, and how the injury impacts their social life. And then there are extracorporeal sequelas, which affect the people around the injured person, like your family.
Wow. So it's really a whole web of consequences. It's not just about the individual.
Exactly. It can affect a lot of people.
Okay. So moving on, let's talk about peritaciones psicológicas.
All right. So we're getting into psychological expert reports now.
Yeah. And these are based on something called forensic psychology, right?
Right. Which is basically applying psychology to legal stuff.
So like understanding why people do the things they do, especially in crimes.
Yeah, or figuring out if a witness is telling the truth, or assessing someone's mental state.
Makes sense. So what are some specific things that forensic psychologists do?
Well, they can assess someone's mental capacity, like whether they understand what's going on legally, if they were in the right state of mind when a crime happened,
Right.
why they might have done something, and whether they're responsible for their actions. They also look at witness testimony and see if it's reliable.
So it's like a mix of psychology and detective work.
In a way, yeah.
And our sources said that forensic psychology can be used in lots of different areas of law.
Oh, yeah. It's not just criminal stuff. It comes up in civil cases, family law, even social and religious law.
Give me some examples.
Okay, so in criminal law, they might look at someone's mental state to see if it's a mitigating factor, something that might reduce their punishment.
Right.
In civil cases, it might be about proving psychological damages. Or in family law, they might help decide who gets custody of a child. It's really broad.
Wow, it seems like forensic psychologists have their hands in a lot of different legal pies.
They do, yeah. And when they do their evaluations, they have to write up what's called an inform peritial psychologico. the psychological expert report.
So that's like the official document that summarizes their findings.
Exactly. And it's got to be based on science, They have to use proper methods like observation and testing, and their findings have to be clear and replicable.
Replicable?
Meaning other experts should be able to get similar results if they use the same methods.
Gotcha. So it can't just be based on the psychologist's gut feeling. There has to be solid evidence.
Right. And there's a lot of emphasis on ethics in this field, too. Like, they have to be careful about using labels, they can't take sides, they have to keep things confidential, all that.
So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with being a forensic psychologist.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we've covered medical and psychological expert reports. What about IT? Our sources mentioned peritajes informáticos.
Right. So that's like IT expert reports. These are becoming more and more common, especially with all the technology we use today.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, what kind of cases would need an IT expert?
Well, they're used a lot in cases involving software, like if someone stole someone else's code.
Okay, like copyright infringement or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then there are data breaches, when hackers get into a company's system and steal information.
That's a big one these days.
Oh, yeah, it's huge. And then there's online fraud, people using computers to scam others.
So basically any kind of crime that happens online.
Pretty much, yeah. And then IT experts can also help with things like contract disputes, if there's a disagreement about an IT project, and also valuing IP assets, like figuring out how much a company's software data is worth.
Gotcha. So they're like the detectives of the digital world.
Yeah, you could say that. And sometimes they even do digital forensics, like recovering deleted files or analyzing evidence from computers. It's like CSI, but for computers.
That's really cool. So are IT experts the same as IT auditors?
Not exactly. IT auditors are more about making sure a company's IT systems are being used properly and securely. They check for things like efficiency, reliability, and security breaches.
Okay, so they're like the internal watchdogs.
Yeah, you could say that. But IT experts can be called in for legal cases, to give their opinion on technical stuff.
And I bet they can be really valuable in court because most judges and juries probably aren't that tech savvy, right?
Exactly. They help bridge that gap between the legal world and the tech world.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, our sources mention this interesting term, medios nuevos de prueba.
Yeah, that basically means new means of evidence.
So what is that all about?
Well, it's basically about how the law keeps up with technology. The legal system is old, but technology is always changing.
Right.
So this term covers all the new kinds of evidence that didn't exist before, like video analysis, digital forensics, all that stuff.
So it's like the legal system recognizing that technology can provide new ways to find the truth.
Exactly. And the Spanish legal system has specific rules for how to use this new evidence. Like Article 299 of the LEC says that these new means of evidence are allowed, and Article 382 explains how they should be admitted in court.
So there's a whole process for making sure it's done properly.
Right.
Okay. And the last type of expert report we need to talk about is peritaciones inmobiliarias.
Right, which are real estate expert reports. These are usually done by court-appointed experts called, get ready for this, peritos judiciales en valoraciones inmobiliarias.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
I know, right? It basically means judicial experts in real estate valuation.
Okay, so these are the pros who come in and assess property.
Exactly. And they have to be completely independent and unbiased. They need to have the right training, which often means they're architects, technical architects, or agricultural engineers if it's a rural property.
So they really know their stuff when it comes to buildings and land.
Oh yeah, they have to. Valuation in mobiliaria or real estate valuation, it's a pretty complex field. You need to understand the market, the economy, urban planning, even construction. And in Spain, it's regulated by this specific order, Order ECO 805-2003.
So there are rules for how it's done, and I'm guessing a lot of these valuations are for mortgages, right?
A huge chunk of them, yeah. But real estate experts can also be involved in other types of cases, too.
Like what?
Well, in civil cases, there might be disputes about property transactions or problems with a building.
Like if someone buys a house and it turns out to be a lemon, they might need a real estate expert to testify.
Exactly. And then there are criminal cases, like if a builder was negligent and someone got hurt. And administrative cases, too, like disputes about building codes or zoning.
So there's a lot of potential for legal issues when it comes to real estate.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And when these experts do their work, they can produce different types of documents.
Okay, like what?
Well, there's the inform, which is basically a report of what they observed about the property. So like a description of the place.
Yeah. And then there's the dictamen, which is their professional opinion based on that report.
Yeah.
So, like, if they think the property is worth a certain amount.
Gotcha.
And then there's the peritation, which is their formal expert opinion for court. And finally, there's the certificado, which is basically a certified statement about a specific fact related to the property.
Okay, so there's a whole range of documents they can create depending on what's needed.
Exactly. And a full real estate expert report, it's pretty detailed. It has to include all the background info about the property, like who owns it, where it's located, all that stuff.
Okay.
And then a description of the property, a detailed analysis of how they valued it, an explanation of how they came up with the value, and then their final conclusion.
So it's not just pulling a number out of thin air. There's a whole process behind it.
Right. And then, as we mentioned before, there's taxation immobiliaria, which is specifically the appraisal of real estate, usually for things like loans or insurance.
So that's like putting the final price tag on it.
Okay, so we've talked about all these different types of expert reports and how they work. But what about the experts themselves? What's the legal framework that governs them?
Well, in Spain, it all starts with the Spanish Constitution.
Okay, and what does the Constitution say about experts?
It doesn't specifically mention experts, but it emphasizes the importance of justice and the rule of law.
Right.
And that sets the stage for how experts fit into the legal system. They're there to help ensure that justice is done, by providing their knowledge and expertise.
Makes sense. So are there specific laws that deal with experts?
Yeah, there are a few key ones. There's the LOPJ, which is the organic law of the judiciary.
Okay.
And then there's the LEC, the civil procedure law, which we've talked about already.
Right.
And the LCRIM, which is the criminal procedure law.
Yeah.
And then there's the free legal aid law, which is important because it ensures that everyone has access to legal representation and expert assistance, even if they can't afford it.
That's a really important point. Everyone deserves a fair shot in court, regardless of their financial situation.
Absolutely. And one of the fundamental principles of the Spanish judicial system is judicial independence.
Judicial independence.
Yeah, basically it means that judges are free to make their own decisions based on the law and the evidence without being influenced by anyone, not even higher courts.
So they can't be pressured or told what to do.
Exactly. And this independence extends to experts, too.
So experts also need to be impartial and unbiased.
Right. They're not there to take sides. They're there to provide their honest opinion based on their expertise.
And what happens if someone thinks an expert isn't being impartial?
Well, there are ways to challenge them. Like there are these things called causas de recusación, which are basically grounds for disqualifying a judge.
Okay.
But they can also apply to experts. It's basically a way of saying, hey, this person might not be objective. We need someone else.
So what are some of these grounds for disqualification?
Well, it could be things like family ties to one of the parties, or if the expert has a personal interest in the outcome of the case.
Like if they stand to gain financially or something?
Exactly. Or if they have a history with one of the parties, like if they've sued each other before.
So it's about preventing any conflicts of interest.
Right. And the Spanish Constitution also guarantees the right to effective judicial protection.
What does that mean exactly?
It basically means that everyone has the right to a fair and speedy trial, and that the legal system should be accessible to everyone.
That's a fundamental right, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And the LEC, the civil procedure law, is designed to make sure that happens.
Exactly. And when it comes to experts, the LEC has a lot to say about them. Like Articles 335 to 352 specifically deal with expert opinions. And in the past, the court-appointed experts were usually given more weight. But now the LEC gives more importance to the reports submitted by the parties themselves.
So it's more balanced now.
Right, because both sides can bring in their own experts, and the court will consider all the evidence.
Makes sense. Now, let's talk about free legal aid, or asistencia jurídica gratuita, as they call it in Spain.
Okay, so this is a really important part of the system, because it ensures that everyone has access to legal help, even if they can't afford it. It's a right guaranteed by the Constitution.
And what does it include?
Well, it includes things like free legal advice before you even file a lawsuit, representation in court by a lawyer and a procurador, which is like a legal representative, exemption from court fees,
Wow.
and even free expert assistance if you need it.
So you can get an expert to help you with your case, even if you can't pay them.
Exactly. And this is specifically covered in Article 6.6 of the Free Legal Aid Law. It says that this free expert assistance is usually provided by experts who work for the government or public institutions.
Okay.
But if they can't find a suitable public expert, the judge can appoint a private expert and the government will pay for it.
So they make sure you have access to the expertise you need no matter what.
Right. And the law also makes sure that child victims and people with disabilities who have been abused get the expert help they need. It's a really important safeguard.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about how experts are appointed and how they're paid. But what about the expert reports themselves? How are they used as evidence in court?
Well, expert reports, or probas periciales, can be used in both court cases and outside of court, like in private disputes.
So they're not just limited to formal legal proceedings.
Right. And the LEC has all these rules about how different types of evidence are used, including expert reports. That's covered in Articles 299 to 386.
And the LEC treats all expert reports the same, right? Whether they were commissioned by the court or by one of the parties.
Exactly. Yeah, they all have the same weight in court.
So it's a level playing field.
Right. And usually, the expert reports from the parties have to be submitted at the beginning of the case, along with the initial claim or the response to the claim.
Okay.
But the parties can also ask the court to appoint an expert if they need to.
And if a party can't get their expert report done in time for the initial filing, what happens then?
They have to tell the other side as soon as it's ready, and definitely before the first hearing.
Makes sense. So everyone knows what evidence is being presented.
Right. And the court can decide to appoint its own expert if it thinks it's necessary.
Okay. And the LEC also talks about different means of evidence, right? Like what kind of things can be presented in court.
Yeah, Article 299 lists all the different types of evidence, and expert opinions are one of them.
So it's right there in the law.
It is, yeah. And there's also this interesting provision in Article 356 that allows the court to order a joint examination by the judge and an expert.
So they go together to inspect something or someone.
Exactly, yeah. And the parties can also request this if they want.
Interesting. So it's like a team effort to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah, you could say that. And there are specific rules for expert reports in criminal cases too, right?
Right. Like the LE Crim has rules about expert reports on how crimes were concealed and how much stolen goods are worth.
Yeah, and usually in criminal cases, they have two experts instead of just one.
So they get a second opinion, just to be sure.
Exactly. And in labor cases, they can use all kinds of evidence, even new technologies.
So they're keeping up with the times.
They are, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we've talked about how